Well, welcome to Expanding Frontiers. I am your host, Erica Lukes, and I look forward to a new chapter in my life. And it is so good to get into to chat and see Amy and Simon and Scott and Peter and all of my wonderful friends that UFO John Doe, Annie. It's nice to see you, and it's nice to know that over the years I've had continual support from all of you, and we've been on a journey together. So now with Expanding Frontiers, as I have been talking about, I have established a nonprofit here, and we are dedicated to facilitating the sharing of information, guidance, and similar resources. And we also want to effectively use the best research practices. We are a multi-tiered approach to providing the public reliable information on a broad and diverse range of topics. I want to focus on, and we are going to focus on with our nonprofit, space, engineering, energy and environmental issues, human rights issues, and how to counter disinformation, which, as we know, if we're in the UFO world or watching it from afar, that is a very real and serious issue, not only in ufology, but in the world in general right now. So we'll give you skills to learn, as we all have learned, and that's an important thing. I'll also be interviewing people that are contributors to the community, people that are working on domestic abuse issues, people that are working to help preserve or keep the Great Salt Lake from shrinking into oblivion, affecting our ecosystem. There's so many wonderful topics, and I know that all of you that are listening tonight are interested and concerned about all of these things as well, and this is really going to be an exciting adventure. I can't wait. So on that note, you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to join and get our newsletter. Jack Brewer is my partner in crime and has done an amazing job, I have to say, and I want to welcome Jack to the show before we invite our guest of honor this evening. But, Jack has been on UFO Classified many times before. He has the UFO Trail blog spot. He's written 2 books that I definitely suggest you read, and we can talk a little bit about them later. But Jack and I became friends, a few years back, and we kind of watched each other from afar. And slowly we began kind of communicating, and it was really cool because the more I learned about the UFO culture and subject and history, the more I found myself gravitating towards people like Jack, who maybe once believed in something like that, like I did, but then also were diligent enough to do research above and beyond what was being told to us on social media or on certain websites, or by a handful of people that were spreading misinformation, disinformation, and grifting. And so it was very cool to begin to speak with him. And also, we got this idea, Jack, and I'll let you speak here, but, we had this idea to partner and then add Barry Greenwood to our nonprofit. We'll be adding more people to help us in an advisory capacity as we move forward. And so, Jack, welcome to the show. And this is our first show for Expanding Frontiers. I'm really excited about this new chapter.
I am too, Erica, and thanks for having me. Thanks for collaborating with me. I think lots of your viewers and listeners would already know that you and I have been collaborating for quite a while. But we did kind of step it up in the last year or so. I identified Erica early on as someone who knew a lot about the landscape, both literally and figuratively, of the paranormal research community in Utah. And as Erica kind of alluded to there, as you may come at these topics about UFOs, but the longer you stick with them, if you're objective, if you're diligent, if you're honest to yourself, you begin to see that they often bleed into human rights issues, politics, money, and a lot of those rocks aren't looked under. And I identified Erica as someone that knew that landscape really well, and Utah specifically, as well as the UFO community. And I had been asking her, as I would write blog posts and as I wrote my books, I was asking her to help me get in contact with some of her contacts. And I was asking her how she might approach various topics. And eventually, I was talking to her about her archive. And I have some experience in the nonprofit sector, and suggested some questions she might like to ask herself about co-founding a nonprofit. And she thought it over a while, and then we continued to talk about it, and eventually we did incorporate the organization. And Barry Greenwood was accepted an invitation to round out the board, and I feel we have all published some original research of significance. I think some other folks feel that way as well, and I'm looking forward to a lot more work with you. And again, thanks for having me. I'm proud to be here tonight and be a part of the show.
Thank you. I'm proud to be a part of an organization with you, and I think that I know that we're going to do incredible things, and we both have a very similar, interest in the human rights issue, in making sure that people understand that there are people working behind the scenes that are grifting and not doing things for the best, intention, and nowhere is that seen. Well, I mean, in my opinion, I think the UFO community is an exceptional place for grifting, for people that are promoting a fictitious narrative, and that can be very detrimental to a lot of people, as I've talked about before on UFO Classified. And so I know that over the week you and I have talked, and we've uncovered some more information and links to specific people and organizations. And so as we, do our due diligence, you're amazing at doing grammar requests and FOIA requests, and you've been doing that for a long, long time. But as we start seeing this information come in, to us, and we can, put another bombshell out like you have done, week after week on Expanding Frontiers Research.org. It's amazing. And this is the type of work that we need. If the UFO community, if there's any hope of ever cleaning it up, I believe that this type of work needs to be done, and people need to understand the dynamics behind the scenes. And so I look forward to that. And also I want to say that I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about in the future about cryptocurrency, and how crypto and NFTs and all of these things have played a front and center role in the UFO community. And now we're seeing the downfall of all of these companies. And it's going to be interesting to see how that trickles down to the people in ufology who are promoting crypto. So specifically people here in Utah. But anyway, so there you have that. But without further ado, I want to invite our guest this evening. And Jack, you have been talking with Sarah Scoles for a long time. I'm going to bring her on, and I'm so excited to have you on the show because, like I told you before we started, I've been geeking out on all of your work, and it's so exceptional. The topics that you talk about are so important, with the Downwinders and some of the research that you've done on space and technology and the UFO community. I think that's really critical to have voices like you in our midst. So thank you very much. So anyway, I want to introduce Sarah Scoles. She is an astronomer. She is an amazing journalist. You can find her at Scientific America. She's done pieces for the New York Times, the Atlantic, Vice, among many other things. She has written books. One is Making Contact Jill Tartar and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Can't wait to talk to her a little bit about that because I loved Contact, and Jill Tartar is an amazing human being. They are already here, UFO culture and why we see saucers, and the forthcoming mass defect life in a nuclear age. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me, and I'm excited to see what Expanding Frontiers gets up to, and thank you for your words about my articles. I just end up writing about things that I geek out about in private and then happen to be able to get paid to write, so I'm glad that other people can geek out on the same things. So.
Well, it's important, and you were it's just to watch you, to listen to you being interviewed and to hear your story. I mean, you were a small girl, you lived in Florida, you would go out and watch all of the launches, the space shuttle launches, and you had from a young age, much like I did, a passion for the unknown. And I think I think all of us that are here tonight actually have the same type of interest. It's like we look up and we think there's this world around us that we don't know, and how empowering and invigorating to actually research things like that. And then you kind of go behind the scenes and you learn about what happened with the Downwinders and things like that, and some military testing and intelligence games, and you peel back the layers. And so there's so many important things to address, and you do that. And I want to just show really quickly, because Jack sent me this earlier, but this is your photo, your drawing.
Oh man, that's a throwback for sure.
So how old were you when you drew that?
Let's see. I'm not sure exactly. Judging by the handwriting and the fact that I was trying to write in a keyboard, I would guess maybe 8 or 10, something like that. Although no, actually that can't be true, because Contact didn't come out when I was 12. So I guess I was just drawing childlike things when I was probably a teenager.
I love that. That is so cute. And I found my grandmother used to keep all of my papers. And so I was looking through them a few years ago, and I found all these drawings of third, fourth grade with little aliens and ants on their back, help, and just, funny little things and poems that I would write. And so it is fascinating to look back and see that this has always been a part of us in some way.
Yeah, definitely. I have a very strong memory of when I was actually 8 or 10, coming up with a fake solar system of planets with different environmental characteristics and imagining what aliens might be on them. I don't have that one. I wish I could find it, but it's.
So what were they? Were they blue avions?
Yes, all of them.
Tall whites.
Mm-hmm. We got the whole crew in there.
Oh my Lord. And so what, after, your young child, tell us a little bit more about your background when you were in high school, and what led you to where you are now.
Sure. Yeah. So I had always been interested in space, like you said, growing up near Cape Canaveral, watching the shuttle launches. And I think, like you said, Erica, just kind of thinking, wow, there's all this more out there. And at the time, I didn't think about the more that was also down here, like the complications that you also mentioned. But I just, I knew I wasn't going to be a fighter pilot, probably. And so I thought, well, the other way you can become an astronaut, which I wanted to be, was to study science, to study astronomy. So I was like, I'm going to study the most science I can. And then, right before high school, I guess I watched Contact and became obsessed with it. I hope all of your listeners and viewers have seen it, but if not, it's about a scientist who's searching for radio signals from extraterrestrial civilizations and finds one. I won't spoil it, what happens after that. But I was just like, wow, there's invisible signals from space, and somebody is trying to find out if aliens are sending them, and that's their job. I would like to have that job. And so I decided to, go hard into astronomy and physics. And that's when I went into college to major and wanting to focus on radio astronomy and basically follow in the nerdy footsteps of the star of the fictional movie Contact. And so that's where I landed in college, at least. So.
Well, and that's just, that must be so fascinating. I would love to go do a do-over and then do the same thing again. But I wanted to talk a little bit, because I heard in a previous interview with you, and you were talking about how you met Jill Tartar. And that's such a great story.
Yes, at some point after I watched Contact, I found out that this character in the movie was based on a real person, Jill Tartar, who was a radio astronomy and did this for her actual job, not a fictional job. After I was finished with school, my first job was working in public outreach at the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, which is a cool place. You should visit if you're ever in the woods in West Virginia. And it was the 50th anniversary of the first search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so they were bringing everybody who had been a big player in that back to this observatory where that first observation had happened. And Jill Tartar was one of those people. And I had my job for like 2 weeks, I think. I didn't know how to do anything. And so my boss was like, well, what you can do is drive this very large bus down to the telescope full of these very fancy people. And I was like, well, I also do not know how to drive a bus, but I guess I'll give it a shot. And so I did that. I was very nervous. I didn't speak to Jill Tartar at all. And then when she left the bus, she left her wallet on the seat, her purse on the seat. And so when everyone left, I opened it up to try to see whose purse it was, and it was Jill Tartar's. And I was like, this is my opening. So I chased her down and gave her purse. And it wasn't a particularly memorable interaction for her, I don't think, because I was just like, here's your purse. You're welcome.
But then she thought back on it when you contacted her?
She remembered it when I contacted her. Yeah, a few years later, I had gotten into science writing and decided I wanted to try to write a book. And I thought, books are long, I better pick something that I like a lot. And so I thought about this interest that I'd had for a long time in SETI and in her life. And so I just wrote her a random email and said, I gave you back your purse once. I'm super honest and can definitely write a book. Would you let me interview you for 1 million hours and then write a book? And she eventually said yes to that.
And so what was your first, your second meeting with her like? What happened?
We met up at a conference. I believe it was an American Astronomical Society conference. And she's a big tea drinker. So we drank tea and she made me outline how I would write a book. I think she thought I was young, which I was, and didn't know how to write a book, which I didn't, and wanted to see if I had done my due diligence, and then asked what it would require of her, and then and then we were off, and then I spent the next, I think, 2 years. I moved out to California actually just to quit my job, moved to California to interview her, and then I would just go over to her house and make her talk to me for 3 hours at a time.
And so what was she initially, what were your first impressions of her?
I mean, she is a very smart and kind and giving person, but she is also very direct and, has had to fight her way through science, not just for being a woman in science who began decades ago when it was harder than it is now, but also in kind of a fringe field for scientists. And so she's very to the point, which I found intimidating at first, especially when we first started talking. But she is very open and thoughtful. And as you might imagine, for somebody, like you both, who contemplates the big questions of the universe, she's always kind of looking at the big picture and thinking philosophically, even if she's talking about like the electronics of a telescope. So,
and so what were some of the eccentricities that she had? Because we all have them. I mean, Lord knows, everybody has seen them on my show over the years. So
let's see. Well, actually, now that I'm doing this, that reminds me that she told me that one of the eccentricities that I had seen watching interviews with her and that she told me she had to get trained out of was whenever she was speaking in public or on video, she would, lift her eyes up so that she was never looking at the camera, and sometimes close them. And eventually when she became a public figure, someone was like, okay, you have to stop. You have to look at the camera. So there is that.
Was that hard for her to do?
I think that? So. Yeah, I think it required, like any habit, thought and training. I think it was maybe for a TED talk that she gave that she had to undo it. She eats half an avocado with almost every dinner, just cut in half. And she likes to send emails at 2 a.m., I think. So,
Well, I know some people like that.
yeah. Yeah.
At least she's not on Twitter.
No, she's not. It sounds like you've met her, though. You said nice things about. Oh, no.
No.
You should have her on.
I know that would be so much fun. That would really be exceptional. I mean, and for 40 years, I mean, for her to do what she did, and like you said, with kind of the people probably rolling their eyes and getting some pushback in that community, especially being a woman, that must have been difficult for her. Who were her biggest critics during this time period?
I think there were a number of critics in Congress. I'm forgetting the name of the senator who used to give the Golden Fleece Award. Maybe one of you remembers his name, but he would bestow this honor of the Golden Fleece Award on publicly funded projects that he thought were not worthwhile. The taxpayer dollars shouldn't be going to. And he really had it out for SETI programs, and he gave her program the Golden Fleece Award and like put out a press release about how this was an endeavor we shouldn't be doing, and that, that's, I mean, a Golden Fleece Award is a kind of, it's a joke thing, but then he kind of went after the funding for this program, and eventually it worked and got the program canceled. So I would say that is a pretty big critic.
I wanted to say that Arts L7, said William Proxmire gave Golden Fleece.
Yes.
So thank you for that comment.
Now it's all coming back to me. And then I think, actually, maybe surprisingly, the exoplanet scientists, so scientists who study planets beyond the solar system, like as that field was getting going kind of at the same time that SETI was coming to prominence, they were a little bit at odds just because there was only so much money. And the exoplanet scientists would say, we're looking for something that we think we know is out there, and you're looking for something. And so there just came to be this kind of split that has mostly still existed to today.
How interesting. I mean, who were her biggest supporters?
There was a Utah senator, I believe maybe one of your commenters knows his name, or maybe you do, who was very, very supportive of it politically. I think there were people high up at NASA who were on board with it, especially because when SETI started, there was the possibility that they would discover a radio signal from aliens like the next day. Like no one had ever tried it. And so we didn't know how unlikely or how hard it was. And so it actually experienced a lot of support at first, I think.
Interesting. And I wonder if that was Orrin Hatch. UFO John Doe is from Utah as well, and things. And I'll have to look into that. That's very fascinating.
Yeah, I can look up in my own book at some point and get back to you guys.
There's so many details that you have to learn, and then you move on to the next thing, and so it's really fascinating. Jack, do you have any questions? Because I've been kind of just going for it here.
Y'all are doing great. I enjoy hearing Sarah share about her research and how she came about it, and what Sarah did you find like most interesting about the whole interaction with the book, the initial book process, and I mean, not only writing a book, but about someone else and their research. I mean, that was you took on a full plate.
I did. I don't think I knew how full the plate was when I took it on, which is probably the case with most large projects. But, I think it's first most interesting to me, I think, was that Jake Garn, there you go. Thank you, loyal commenters. It's Jill Tartar knows much more about her life than I do, so it's hard when you're interviewing someone about their whole life to even know where to start. But she actually at some point thought that she might write an autobiography. And so she had gathered together what she called her top 100 moments and written them down. And so we just started by going through the things that she thought were the most important 100 things in her life. And then we actually went through her old photo albums just to like jog memories, because we all forget what happened to us until something reminds us. And so just kind of that process of figuring out how to even walk through someone's life was interesting. And then I think, in terms of writing about someone else, it is difficult. I'm a journalist. I'm supposed to be very objective, but if you talk to someone for 3 hours at a time for 2 years, you develop a relationship with them. But then you still have to write an objective book, and including things they might not like. And so that is difficult, like as a human being, I think. And I'm sure you guys experienced that too, talking to people who you might not always agree with. She was not pleased, for instance, when I talked to her ex-husband about his view on their divorce and things like that. So it gets humanly complicated, I guess. Kind of like humans are always the most interesting part of the UFO studies, I think. They're kind of the most interesting part of everything.
Good segue to the next book.
I set you up for that.
So let's talk about that.
You sure did. Yeah, and Sarah's second book, They Are Already Here. I felt like the price of admission was covered in the chapter about when she camped out outside the town with the observatory.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the town in West Virginia that you started working at, and so you had some experience with things like that. Would you please summarize the conspiracy and then what you did about that?
Sure. Yeah. It's been a while now. I think just a little over 4 years since this happened, but about 4 years ago, there's a solar observatory that looks at the sun out in southern New Mexico. And one day it was just evacuated for an undisclosed reason. And so was the whole town, as people said. And anytime there's something spacey and it gets evacuated and people say the FBI evacuated it, then speculation must begin. It's one of the fundamental laws of the universe, I think. And so, there were conspiracy theories that, the telescope had observed something crazy going on with the sun, and the government didn't want people to panic, so they shut it down. And then that perhaps it had uncovered aliens, or perhaps that it had seen something at a nearby military base that it wasn't supposed to see. But the biggest thing about it for me, and I think for a lot of people who had ideas about what was going on, was just that no one was saying anything. Like the FBI was there, the town was evacuated, and no one would say why. And that's, in the absence of information, almost anything can be true or seem true. And so, I live in Colorado, which it's not so far from where it was. I wasn't doing anything. It was a Friday, and I thought, I like camping. I bet I can get pretty close to this observatory. Yeah, I had the insider knowledge that most federal observatories are located on or adjacent to federal land, like national forest land. So I was like, I bet I can find a back way to at least get close to this place and try to see what's going on. So I drove out there, found a trailhead that was like 2 miles away and wasn't closed off. Got there in the dark, just camped there, had a bunch of dreams about how it was probably some crazy person with a bomb who was going to find their way to my tent, who shut the observatory down, and then just hiked in to the observatory and discovered that the town that had been evacuated, it had maybe, I can't remember exactly how many people now, but it was basically just the few people who worked there. The observatory was losing funding. It was essentially being shut down. And there were no signs saying it was evacuated and that you couldn't go on. So I used plausible deniability to just walk in there and say, I didn't know it was closed. There were no signs. But I didn't get very much information while I was there. But the chapter in the book is kind of about that idea that when there is no public information and something is happening at an astronomical or cosmically connected place, it's ripe for wild ideas, and there's not a way to tell whether an idea is wild and true or wild and untrue, and just kind of how those things tend to happen. Anyway, it was someone downloading illegal materials from the government servers that shut it down, which is much less exciting. But
no, I mean, but that the whole, and you bring up such a great point about how, you've got this story, and I remember hearing about that at the time, and there was all this speculation. Oh my gosh, it's aliens, it's A, B, C, and D, and so people kind of do run with things, and you see that, I think now, like with a lot of the true crime things that are going on, and people getting out there and trying to solve all these things. And I mean, that's great, but sometimes it isn't aliens, and sometimes it's, there are other explanations. And I just have to share a story, because to me, that brought up when you were talking about this, but a few years back, there was a moment in time, an evening, where a vial of anthrax was missing from Dugway Proving Ground. And so that's, obviously shut down Dugway. And around the same time period, there were UFOs that were caught on camera over the surrounding neighborhoods and things. And so it was just a very interesting thing to see this, this happened. The base was on lockdown. And nobody really actually knows what happened. Dugway is a very interesting place. So that just reminds me of that. And there was a lot of conspiracy that grew out of that moment in time. So
and we still don't have an explanation of what happened. Or?
You know what? They gave an explanation, and I'm sure that's true.
Right.
They've given many explanations about what happens at Dugway when 6,000 sheep drop over in a day and things, and decades later you find out other things were happening.
Yeah. I was just this summer on a road trip from Colorado to Oregon, and drove past, the very outskirts of Dugway, and I was like peering as far as my little eyes could to try to see anything that was good, even though I'm sure it was miles from the actual road I was on. I was like, I know this place. There's some stuff going on over there that I would like to see.
Yeah, it's a fascinating place, and for somebody being, obviously I was born and raised in it. Actually, I spent the first year of my life living at the base. My father was in the military, and so that explains so much about my personality, because Lord knows what I was exposed to at the end of the day. But I mean, it's an obviously mysterious place, a place that needs to be kept under, there's a lot of secrecy with good reason. But in the same breath, they're still doing open air testing. A lot of things are happening, and the people that live around Dugway, their life expectancy is 10 years less, from what I understand, than people that live in other parts of Utah. So again, you look at the Downwinders, and then you look at things that are happening around Dugway and in specific areas, and you wonder at the end of the day what the toll is for testing on local populations.
Definitely. Yeah, I didn't realize that about life expectancy. That's it's not ideal.
Well, kind of leapfrogging off of those stories too, and Sarah's point about the apparent illegal activity that was going on at the observatory. People use their employers' internet or internets at public libraries, things like that, for unsavory activities and get caught at it, all the time. And alluding to a story recently in the news, warrants get served all the time at businesses and personal residences. Sometimes those people happen to have UFO websites. And, one thing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the other until it does. But it sure makes good fodder for clicks and things like that in the meantime.
Right.
And Sarah, what do you think, like with Area 51 and all of this, all of these things that have been put forward in the UFO community, and obviously disinformation. I know in another time when I heard you speaking on a show, you mentioned the fact that the intelligence community was very proud, obviously, of the fact that you've got some guy who's camping out on the border of Area 51, and he's photographing things. He thinks they're aliens, and the intelligence community and security, I mean, they're not going to bother stopping that because it's such a great story to, I mean, everyone thinks he's nuts, and nobody's going to take it seriously when it's actually potential. I mean, it is our own experiment technology that we're experimenting with.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, in general, I think throughout human history, the same forces that have always been in place continue to be in place. And so, you know, what worked well for the military in the Cold War when they were first developing stealth aircraft and things to let people think, you know, what they were seeing was UFOs, continued through the Bob Lazar days, when I think is when Area 51 became most famous for UFO things. Like, it's not worth their time to correct it, because what would they correct it to? Like, this is our awesomest technology that we can't tell you about. Like, they're not going to do that. And then if they acknowledge it, that gives it more weight. And so but I think, I mean, I went out there a few times when I was working on my book and after, and I mean, it made me understand why people feel so weird about Area 51 and what goes on there. It's because it is weird. I saw my first flare exercises, where you probably see them all the time in Utah, but where fighter jets are chasing each other, and one of them drops a set of flares, and they just kind of hover there, and they look like they're connected in a shape, and the shape looks like a UFO. And in the middle of the night, they'll be testing aircraft that are behaving in ways that commercial airliners that pass over your house don't. And it is weird, and it's not stuff we see every day. And if you go there with the idea that it's because there's an alien spaceship underground and they bring it out while you're camping and you can look at it, then that is what you will think. But I mean, I think they don't. I think they like the mystique a little bit. Like when I was out there, have either of you been out there? Have you gone?
Yep.
Did you? Oh, you should go, Jack. If you camp close enough to the border, which Erica, maybe you have, you'll get visits from the guards like throughout the night.
Yeah, they keep track of that. Thank the Lord they keep track of that. So yeah, that is very interesting. The second you're anywhere near there, they've got their eyes on you, and they let you know that that's the case.
Yeah, right. Do we have any news on that? The warrant for our friend who investigates Area 51 and what was going on?
Not that I am aware of. I tried to contact the individual directly and have not received a response, because I was going to do my usual FOIAs, just get the court records, why ask anybody, just get the court records. And Erica had an interest in it. And so I was just going to get the records. And I was a little discouraged by what I was reading, that journalists, I felt, were being a little more objective about it than what I felt UFO journalists were seemed to be mostly quoting people rather than court records. And a recurring theme was that court records were sealed, and it was not clear if they were being told that by the court or by a person. Like, that wasn't clear. And so I thought, well, let's just start with him and ask him if he'll just share what warrants were given to him with me. And he has not responded. So I would be interested in seeing those warrants, and maybe I will follow through more with the courts and see if they will. But it's gonna get complicated, because there's FBI, there's Air Force, and somewhere in there's a judge, and so yeah, I was hoping he could point me in the right direction and save what, could turn into a 2-year process to,
Well, ask
so,
George Knapp.
and Eric and Sarah knows all about that. The story's gone by the time you get the records.
Yes, that is the
And
very
so just
I'm
because
sorry, Erica, what did you say?
No, I was just said you should ask George Knapp. He'll tell you.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
so people in the chat room, if you could explain a little bit about this story. There's some people that are not quite up on it.
Sure. I just have a cursory knowledge of it. If you use your favorite search engine and look for Area 51, Dreamland website, FBI raid, you'll find it. Use terms like that. The newspapers reporters were saying that this man that has run a website about Area 51 for several years had warrants served at his home and another property he was associated with in a different city. And as Sarah said about the observatory, the powers that be, FBI and Air Force Office of Special Investigations, said they'll talk about it when they talk about it. They're not required to explain why they're doing what they're doing. And it has been a source of speculation. And as the UFO culture has done since its initiation, since it began, any type of activity from intelligence agencies or law enforcement agencies is typically viewed as confirmation of what they choose to believe. And so that's why I was pointing out warrants get served all the time, sometimes to people that have UFO websites. And that,
I mean, I've been arrested at least 50 times. So
do tell.
That's not true. I don't even have one good arrest story, but I kind of hope that in the middle of the conversation, the FBI burst down this door behind me.
That could be interesting.
That would be great.
For you guys. I hope not,
but I get your point.
But I have to say there was a fellow here who is into UFOs, and he was out a few years back. He was investigating. He liked to hang out by Dugway, on the border of Dugway, and I mean, for me, for multiple reasons, I wouldn't want to hang out on that border because you never know what you're going to be exposed to. It just doesn't even interest me. I mean, they've got stuff going on. I can go out to another space and look for unexplained things. But he did photograph things, and those photographs did make their way out into the public domain. And he visited by people, and from my understanding, they confiscated his computer and cameras and things. And I had a person that I knew that was a contractor at one of the Air Force bases, and they were at a meeting, and his name was specifically mentioned. It's like, do not talk to this man, don't go near him. And I just thought that was really fascinating. So they do pay attention with good reason to people that are hanging out on the borders of restricted facilities. It's not the smartest plan, in my opinion, but
but it is technically legal if you're beyond the border, which is where I think things get murky for places like Area 51 and Dugway. And the individual we're talking about at Area 51 knows the rules very well. He's been hanging out by the borders for I think more than 20 years and knows what not to cross. But that doesn't mean that anyone with authority likes the fact that he's doing that, even if it is legal. And so, yeah. But I mean, I love to look at the military things going on in the sky. I recently moved from Denver to the mountains in southern Colorado, and been a Big Valley, and from Colorado Springs, they do a bunch of dogfights with the planes and just flying around very low. And every time I hear a plane, I run outside and stare at it.
I do too.
I still love to watch it.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do too. I mean, I'm right here in Salt Lake, and there's so many interesting things going on with Hill Air Force Base, and obviously Dugway, and we've got the Utah Test and Training Range, and so it is fascinating. And I always loved, if I hear something, I'm out there and I have my camera. It's very fascinating. And then with drone technology now and things that are taking place, we are going to be using drones to deliver prescription medication in Utah, which is just a good plan from, what a great idea.
I have a lot of people trying to jump very high. Get someone else's medicine.
It's just crazy. I don't know. But anyway, I'm sorry to go off on that tangent there, but it's just, the whole thing is fascinating. Jack, where else do you want to go? Because I know you had a specific set of questions that you wanted to ask.
Yeah. I'll start by saying, so yeah, and they are already here. Sarah explains her journeys about. I mean, she is an inspiration to those of us that want to have laptop will travel and just go see what's going on and write about it. She goes to the hot spots, talks to people. She spoke to me. That's how I first started talking with her, and I highly recommend that book. I did want to ask you too about your latest project. Tell us about the name of it and what's happening with that. You just submitted it, right?
I did. Yeah, I just turned in a draft, and book publishing is very slow, so it won't be out for at least a year, but it is finished. It's called Mass Defect, tentatively Mass Defect: Life in the New Nuclear Age. And mass defect is a term that in physics that kind of explains how you get energy out of atoms via Einstein's famous E equals mc squared. So this is a book about the nuclear weapons complex and scientists who work on nuclear weapons in some capacity, usually who started out studying just regular physics or regular astrophysics, and then kind of moved into working in national security at the national laboratories run by the Department of Energy. So I spent, when COVID permitted, the past two-ish years running around to places like Los Alamos and Sandia National Labs and Lawrence Livermore National Labs, all these weapons places scattered kind of around the West, trying to learn what makes people make that switch from studying basic physics to working on weapons, how they think about the weapons complex and their own work, and just kind of the role that nuclear weapons play in the modern world. Also, my dogs are barking. Hopefully you can't hear them.
That was kind of cute. We might need to meet them.
Okay, we'll see. They would love to meet you, I'm sure. And yeah, I kind of got started on this just when I moved out to Colorado 6 years ago. It's fairly close to places like Los Alamos, and I write about science. So one day I just wrote Los Alamos and was like, hey, can I come visit? I want to hear more about what you guys are up to, which is the privilege of people doing journalism, is that other people just answer your questions. So I went down there and started talking to scientists, and at the nuclear weapons labs, they mostly like to talk about non-nuclear weapons work. They like to talk about their work on supernovae or Mars rovers or things like that. But kind of behind the curtain, you can tell that all of that work somehow also applies to nuclear weapons. And I started to just peer behind the curtain, and I just thought it was fascinating and something that seemed like it was going to become more relevant than it had felt, since the Cold War. And then that has proven to be fairly true, at least with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and nuclear weapons are just kind of part of the conversation more than they have been the past few years. So yeah, I'll stop there for now, but that's how I've been keeping myself out of trouble for the past couple.
And you go into a history of it, at least to some extent?
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
Yeah, some. I try to focus mostly on the modern aspects because there's a lot of books already written about the history and about the Manhattan Project, where they first developed nuclear weapons, and kind of the Cold War stuff going on, but not so much about what it's like now. But I feel
like much less like since John Alexander was at Los Alamos.
Right.
Yeah.
Although I would have liked to talk to him when he was there too.
Well, sure.
Yeah. But I mean, I feel like to talk about nuclear weapons, you always have to talk about the history to some extent, the development. So I have some stuff in there about the testing, nuclear testing, and the Manhattan Project, and all of that. So.
And so let me ask you, because I mentioned you did research in an article about Downwinders,
Mm-hmm.
and for me this obviously hits close to home because they're Downwinders that I know that are family members, and it's the fallout, the effects are still being seen to this day, and it's very sad. And the University of Utah has a library up there where they have interviewed people and told their stories, and that is such an amazing thing to actually sit down and watch the interviews that they have put forward. And so give us a little bit of information, please, about what you learned about Downwinders and the impact that has had on so many lives.
Sure. Yeah, I first heard about the concept of a downwinder a few years before I wrote that article. I went to the open house at the Trinity site in New Mexico, where scientists exploded the first ever atomic weapon, and there were people protesting outside using this term downwinders that I had never heard before, who said, we lived in the communities near where you tested this weapon, and we have these health effects, and you're not acknowledging it or doing anything about it. And so that was kind of my first exposure to it. And then at some point in doing research for my book, I came across this University of Utah library archive that they've been putting together, which has these oral histories of people who were alive during testing as kids and experienced it directly, and their relatives. And I just, like you, it sounds like Erica, kind of started watching these videos and reading the transcripts, and honestly couldn't believe it. It was a different time in a lot of ways. So nuclear testing took place for years above ground in Nevada at what was then called the Nevada test site, and they would just explode nuclear weapons in the desert above ground, which seems kind of insane today. I don't know if it seemed insane then entirely, but fallout and dust and particles and radiation don't just stay in one place, they drift, and a lot of that radiation drifted toward Utah and southern Utah in particular. And so the people who were in the path of that fallout are called downwinders. And in these histories, which if you're interested, you should definitely check them out. It's the Marriott Library Archive. People talk about there would be a test and this orange dust would descend on their cars, and the kids would draw smiley faces in the car dust, which is radioactive fallout dust, or strange men appearing at school to give kids iodine tablets to combat radiation, passing through checkpoints in their cars where strange men would hose down the car so the fallout wouldn't continue past a certain border. And it was just, I think, in partly government officials, we didn't know as much about the effects of radiation then as we do now. But I think we knew enough if we were washing down cars to know that it was not great to be doing it. And so, yeah, there are, cancer clusters and other health effects from people who were living in those parts of the country at that time. And there's a piece of legislation called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, where people can get some amount of money, not very much. I think it's $50,000 to cover medical bills, which, if you know anything about medical bills, is not very much at all. And it just got renewed. It was set to expire, and it got renewed. But yeah, it's a a pretty sordid history, and one that affects your state in particular, Eric.
Yeah, and I mean, just watching, I mean, listening to the interviews and hearing, I mean, whole families were wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking small kids, you know, I mean, the whole family. And I remember hearing a specific story about, you know, a girl that was in grade school, and it's like, oh, let's go outside. We're going to watch this.
Mm-hmm.
And they would all sit outside there. And obviously we know that there were men and women in the military that were, hey, go out and sit out there and, you know, watch this. And there's so many people whose lives have been cut short and changed. And to this day, we still don't understand the repercussions in our environment in specific areas that we've seen the fallout.
Yeah, and I'm not going to remember exactly what it was, but like the people who do radioactive dating of things have to take into account the time period when we started testing nuclear weapons that has, you know, affected their samples and affected the background. And it's just it doesn't just go away once you stop testing. So
right, that must have been probably a difficult story for you to write. I mean, it's because it's so emotional, and there's so many people that were affected. So I think that was something that I saw and that you had done, and I was really drawn to that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, I just wrote about it. The people doing the real work are like the people at the library, or the people who I talk to, and I just chronicle it. But yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of people, particularly if they don't live out west somewhere, who haven't heard of this, just like I hadn't heard of it until I came out here. But it's an important part of American history that was not great.
No, absolutely not. And I am lucky I have 5 minutes away from the library. And so
awesome.
I've spent a lot of time up there looking at different things. And I've been talking to a fellow that worked there and was an archivist for 40 years. And interestingly enough, my grandfather's best friend was the main archivist at the University of Utah for many, many years. And so I have some of his work that you can't find now. And I wish that I could be that age again and actually understand the importance of what he has done, what he did. But I can't wait to go back up there and check out some more things. And I'm going to be interviewing, hopefully, this fellow I'm speaking about pretty soon. So that will be very cool.
Great. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about Steve. Not to transition the subject, but this is something that I think is so freaking cool. And you wrote an article about UFOs that led into learning about Steve. So give us a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, so Steve is an atmospheric phenomenon that was discovered not very many years ago because of amateur astronomers amateur atmospheric scientists, I guess, and photographers who were watching the sky. So I guess to take a step back, there are people who live far enough north to see the northern lights who take pictures of them because they're awesome to take pictures of. And if I lived there, I'd probably do that too. And then there are people who study the northern lights professionally, and those two groups don't always interact with each other that much. But one time there was a professional scientist who was giving a talk in Canada, and he studied atmospheric phenomena and different kinds of interactions that led to the northern lights. And he'd seen pictures off and on of this weird phenomenon that was purple and green and kind of looked like a ladder in the sky. And he just thought, oh, that's just like kind of a weird aurora, and put it into this bucket of things that he understood. And then after he gave this talk, he went out to dinner with some of these Northern Lights photographers, and one of them showed him a picture of this thing and said, "This is a really strange thing, this purple and green ladder thing." And he realized after looking at it and thinking about it that it was a strange thing. He'd been putting it in this bucket of like, it's part of this phenomenon that I understand. But if he realized through an interaction with this non-professional scientist that it wasn't something he understood, and so he started to research it and to look at the atmosphere with professional instruments. They had an array of cameras around a lake on the ground, and then also a satellite in the sky. And he was just watching the data for this thing. And then one day he saw it, and but these scientific instruments don't just take regular pictures. They take much more ugly looking data. And so he couldn't prove for sure that what he had seen was this thing that I guess I forgot to mention, the photographers had started to call Steve because they didn't know what it was. They just made up a name for it, Steve. And so he posted in a Facebook group of these photographers like, hey, did you guys see this Steve in the sky? And they had pictures. And so through this collaboration with non-professional scientists, they fused their data together to discover that they didn't know what something was, and then after that discover what it was. And so in my article I was talking about how that could be an outcome of NASA's proposed UFO research program, is that like it's a good thing to be attuned to things in the sky that we can't explain, because maybe someday there'll be aliens, and maybe someday there'll also be some scientific phenomenon that we don't understand. And from paying attention to the observations of just regular people living their lives who say, I saw something strange, instead of ignoring it, you can actually make pretty interesting discoveries.
Well, and I want to just say, this article is fascinating from many perspectives. NASA's UFO study isn't really looking for space aliens. A new investigation of unidentified aerial phenomena could have bigger impacts on atmospheric science than on astrobiology. And so that's a great article, and you can find that on your website. And so go, if you don't mind, go back to, if you can tell us a little bit more in depth about that article and some of the things with how UFOs and NASA, pointed in this direction.
Sure. So a few months ago, NASA announced that it was going to be doing a UFO study where it would, it didn't promise very much. It wasn't a very large study. The agency said, we're going to gather together some smart scientists from various backgrounds, look at the data that we have gathered over the decades, and figure out which types might be useful for understanding UAP. Do we say UFOs or UAP on here? Which do we all prefer? Either one.
Either, and all of the above, and whatever. It's yeah.
Okay. So they said, they have data from both instruments on Earth, satellites in orbit, planes flying around Earth. They have all kinds of data that's just hanging out and hasn't, all of it hasn't been analyzed, and definitely all of it hasn't been analyzed to see if there's any evidence of UFOs in it. And so the agency said, we're going to see what we can do about that in a rigorous, scientific, agnostic way, which I think is great. I assume you both think it's pretty great. It's a cool endeavor, but I'm sure everybody listening and watching has their own opinions about what UFOs are or are not, or what we can say. But what NASA can do if it has this data is kind of do a systematic evaluation of like how often we see something that we can't explain. What are the different types of things that we see that we can't explain? And a lot of UFO data is kind of anecdotal or based on personal experience, and having that kind of hard data and a way to look at it from multiple sensors in multiple ways is cool. And so in my article, I said that is true, and that also probably what NASA will discover, and probably what NASA is more interested in, is mining its archival data for strange atmospheric phenomenon like Steve, where somebody sees something weird, investigates it more deeply, realizes it's weird, and then figures it out. And I talked to one scientist who said, that there's tons of things we don't understand about the atmosphere, and there's lots of new phenomena to discover. And I think, a lot of times in UFO studies, people are disappointed when you're not discovering the aliens. But I think, maybe someday someone will. And in the meantime, it's not bad to be having all these other discoveries.
No, it's fascinating, and I would encourage everybody to go look up Steve and see. It's just like you see these photographs, and they are absolutely unbelievable. And I have to ask you, have you seen the Northern Lights?
I have not. I was actually just about to ask both of you. Have you seen them?
I have, and there is somebody that is in chat who was over in Norway. Helga, thank you for being here and always sending me wonderful pictures of Heshdalen. But I was over in Norway, and I had an amazing opportunity to see the Northern Lights. And I will tell you, it was almost like a religious experience, because it was just, you sit there and you look up at the sky and you see something that is so bizarre and so insanely beautiful that I mean, I'll never forget it. I feel very blessed that I was there, and I can't wait to go back, hopefully sometime soon, or go up to Alaska, or just go somewhere to see it, because it's stunning.
You got to go find Steve also.
I need to find, that's gonna be okay, that's a good plan. I'm gonna go find Steve.
Jack, have
leave it at that.
I have not ventured up there. No, I've never been any further north than like Delaware. But yeah, Erica has gone to Hesdalen and talked to the people there and looked around and up close and personal.
It's been fun, and I think, Sarah, I mean, I love going on adventures like that. It's just like throw something in your car and go out and set up the tent, or just take an adventure. There's so many cool things, places to go and stories to be told, and that was just a real pleasure for me to actually experience the Northern Lights, and someday it will be Steve.
Fingers crossed.
I know, that'll be good. And so I want to talk a little bit about another article that you wrote, and I'm sorry to jump all over the place, but I'm good at this. And you've got so many things that I want to hear about, but you wrote an article about the military's funding Ephesus to keep its brain enhancement experiments in check. And I think right now is such a critical time to talk about ethics and AI and some of the things that we're seeing in our environment that potentially have the potential to reshape our narrative. And so give us a little bit of information about that and the research you did with regard to this article.
Yeah, so that was with, I spoke to, I think, 3 people who had been funded by this program called Minerva that the military runs, which is kind of like the social science aspects of military technology. And Minerva had funded a project to look at the ethics of things like brain-computer interfaces. So when somebody puts essentially a chip in your brain that can connect to something else, so like maybe I think they had used it to have people, fly simulated fighter jets with their minds, or move a prosthetic limb, or things like that. And so the article was about, if we're going to be doing these things, we need to have the usual, like, regular medical consent sorts of things. Like, can you get informed consent from a soldier who is, it's their job, and they work for the government, and then also questions of autonomy and bodily control and things like that. And so it was an article about these scientists who ask those sorts of questions about military experiments. And a lot of the neuroscience kinds of military work, the front line that they put in front of the public is like, we're making a brain-computer interface to help soldiers who have PTSD feel better, or nice things like that. But there is always a second way that same technology could be used. So another part of the ethics is thinking about, well, if you can change the way someone's brain is working to help their PTSD be better, what else could you do? Could you make them less fearful so that they can walk into battle and not be afraid? And like, is that okay? And so just all these kinds of questions that seem very sci-fi, but that it's important for someone to ask before, the technology is widespread.
And so, we've seen from what we've talked about this evening with Dugway and a lot of different things that have taken place in America or overseas, where things can be hidden from the public. And when you're in the military, you do sign up and you're exposed to things. People that lived in St. George were exposed to things without consent. Who is overseeing this, and is technology growing so quickly that we don't have a handle on all of these things?
That's a good question. Believe it or not, the military also doesn't tell me everything, so I don't know all the answers. I wish they would. But I know that, so one of the agencies doing a lot of this work has been historically DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which people are probably familiar with. They're the ones who do lots of the creepy R&D experiments. And they do have an ethics board of people, I think, both inside the military and outside, who evaluate what they're doing. But I don't believe that the results of those ethics investigations are public. So they are evaluated, but we can't evaluate them ourselves, which is at once probably necessary sometimes, because some things do need to be classified, but also the public can't make up their own minds about what is okay, or be informed about it. And I think those are really good and hard questions. And I guess this is not speaking to the military experiments directly, but in a lot of sectors, we don't make hard and fast rules around things until something goes very wrong. Actually, I'm writing an article right now about commercial human spaceflight, and how there's basically no regulations around the safety of human people who go on private human space flights. And it's because they don't want to stifle the industry before it's had time to flourish. So unless there's an accident, they're not going to make any rules until the companies have it figured out. And
wow,
that I think that happens a lot. So
that's frightening on so many levels.
Yes.
But it's okay. Yeah. Elon Musk is in charge, so we should feel very good.
I can't afford a space flight, so it's not a personal problem for me. But for those who can, they might want to look into the regulations.
Wow. And so, what would be the first? Where does this go? Like, how would anybody even begin to get control of this?
So for the space flight specifically, so it's the FAA who would be in charge, and they currently actually have what's called a moratorium on making rules about it. And the moratorium has expiration dates. So after the expiration date, they can choose to renew it, or they can choose to make rules. And so it expires, I think, in October of next year. So by then they will either have to decide, we're going to make some rules, or we're going to give them some more time before they make some rules. So I might wait until October next year to go on my space flight.
But the outfits are so cute.
That's true.
Elon Musk is little spacesuits. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah.
And then, what do you think about the privatization of space and creating these, floating hotels and mining the moon and all of these things? It's like the Wild West.
Yeah. I think most of my thoughts are that it is the Wild West, and I don't think that will last, because probably there will be things that go wrong, or disputes that arise, and there will have to be, like, we're humans, we make rules. We probably will have to make some, but mostly I think that I'm not holding my breath about all of it actually happening. I think that a lot of it, particularly things like moon mining or settling Mars, or having everybody have an experience in orbit, like, I'm not actually sure that there's the will of the people or the economics behind it to actually make that happen. And so maybe we won't have to worry about the rules at all. I don't know. What do you two think?
To me, I think it's fascinating. It's frightening. I think I just think there's lots of potential for things to go horribly awry, and we've done enough damage on our own planet. Let's make sure that we give some of these billionaires, just a red carpet to go explore and exploit other places. It's alarming to me.
Mm-hmm.
The longer I live, the more I get concerned about the risk to reward ratio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, a drive down to Miami can seem a lot more inviting than orbiting the moon just to say I got to look,
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I mean, to me, I read an essay. I think it's called The Case Against Space Exploration. It's by a sci-fi author who spent a bunch of his career writing about things like settling space and space exploration, but then eventually got very cynical, and pointed out things like that. We haven't even really, there's no large scale settlement of very inhospitable places on Earth. Like when we can survive and want to survive in deeply unpleasant places at a large scale on Earth, then maybe we should try Mars. But we don't even have a handle on that. So how could we possibly have a handle on how to do it 2 years away in a place without very much oxygen? So
Yeah.
it stuck with me. Yeah.
Interesting. And I thank you for answering that. And I want to ask you too, because I think that the rover, I mean, oh my gosh, I'm so fascinated by NASA and what they've done with this. And you wrote an article on Perseverance. And so can you just again, tell us a little bit about that and your study of what NASA is doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I wrote an article. Do you mean the article like when it was landing, coming down?
Yes. Yep.
Or? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Perseverance rover is part of the Mars 2020 mission, and it went from Earth to Mars. And for my article, the people who made what they call the entry, descent, and landing system, the thing that gets it down through the atmosphere onto the surface of Mars, they work out of Lockheed Martin in Colorado. And so I got to go hang out with them as it was descending toward the red planet. And yeah, it was very cool and very stressful because no matter how many times you land on Mars, I think it's hard every time. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And so these people had built the little shell that was protecting it while it was coming down, and then the cone and all the electronics. And so they were just like crossing their fingers and holding their breath that it would work and the rover would descend to the ground in one piece. And it did. And now it's there hanging out on the surface of Mars with some of our other rovers, which are both alive and dead. At the moment, we've got a little collection scattered across Mars now. But Perseverance is the most advanced one we have there. And one of its primary goals is to look for potential signs of life, probably past life, but very small percentage chance present life. And so it's kind of doing chemical mapping and rock sampling and just trying to get a handle on what is going on in this big crater called Jezero crater on Mars that used to be a lake. And so they landed here because they suspect it used to have water, and maybe Martians exist and maybe Martians liked water, and maybe we can find evidence of them. And so it's been collecting samples. Actually, I think there was some news the other day that it has started collecting the samples that we hope to someday bring back to Earth. So it's putting samples of rocket dust and dirt into little test tubes and kind of stashing them away for a future mission that we will send to go collect them and bring them back to Earth to study here, which will be the first time we've done that on another planet, and is
amazing.
Wild. Yeah.
I mean, so tell me, okay, so you were there when everything happened. Like, how long of a period was that, and were these people completely, I can't imagine like the elation and just the exhaustion that everybody experienced during that time period.
Definitely. Yeah. I think I think they call it the 7 minutes of terror between when it starts to go through the atmosphere and when it gets to the ground. And during that time, you can't really communicate with it. And there's also a delay in when you hear back because the signals have to travel. So it's traveling, it can't communicate. When it does land and can communicate, you don't find out right away because the signals have to go through millions of miles of space. And so if I recall correctly, during those minutes while we were all just waiting, people were pretty quiet. You know, when people are stressed out, they don't like to talk a lot. So I think there was a lot of nail biting and heavy breathing probably. And but then as soon as they got the signal, the room did just kind of erupt. High fives. It was pretty prime COVID time, so there wasn't a whole lot of like touching or hugging, but a lot of like air high fives and yelling and just relief. I think it's a lot of pressure to be in charge of a very expensive taxpayer-funded program that everyone is watching on YouTube to see if your stuff succeeds. So I can't imagine. It was very stressful to me, but they were excited enough that it made me tear up a little bit when it landed, because it's a very cool achievement. No matter how cynical you could get about spaceflight, it's a very impressive and very
Sure.
cool.
Well, I mean, and just to watch, there was a really good documentary that I watched and I mentioned on UFO Classified, Goodnight Oppie. And it was like, I mean, that was such an amazing experience to watch these people from, you know, the inception through the years. I mean, of just trying to, I mean, come up with ideas and strategies, and to watch it land, to watch both of the rovers land, and then to watch, you know, the life expectancy of the rovers. I mean, it was, you know, this time period, and it lasted years longer, and it was just such an amazing, they became children.
Mm-hmm.
Really, because there was such an emotion for this, and so to have that opportunity for you to be there and see some of these people behind the scenes and experience that, the terror and the joy and the profound sense of accomplishment. I mean, that really is, I'm sure that's probably one of the finer moments of your life. It would be for me. That's a really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, absolutely. I felt very lucky to be there, and I would encourage everyone who's watching to write to Lockheed Martin and see if they can also be present for the next one.
Good plan.
Yeah.
Jack, I think we've got a mission.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's just, it's so cool. And sometimes you get so bogged down in the UFO world, which we're going to talk about for a little bit now, because you've done research, you were a part of that or watched it, and it is an interesting culture. And so it is fun to talk about NASA and some of the great things that we accomplish as human beings, and some of looking at Steve and all of these wonderful things. And then you get into the UFO world. And so tell us a little bit about how that first happened and what you began to learn and the people you came into contact with.
Mm-hmm. How I first got involved in UFO world?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I had a pretty late, I guess I was a UFO late bloomer probably. I was always very interested in aliens and SETI and things like that from an early age, but I had just kind of put UFOs in this other box. Like, I think a lot of people who, I didn't go on to really be a professional scientist, but I think that's what a lot of professional scientists do, is like, that's over there, we're over here. And so I didn't really pay much attention to it until that famous day in December 2017, when the New York Times published their story about ATIP, the Pentagon's alleged UFO research program. And at first, I was out doing something, I got the alert, I was like, that's very interesting, I'll look at it later because it's probably not that interesting. And then when I got home, I looked at it, and I'm not sure how much people remember about the article itself, but there were a number of pretty sensational details in there. It suggested that someone had a piece of a crashed UFO. There were videos of UFOs or alleged UFOs, and it all sounded very real and very creepy. I guess when I was reading it, I just got kind of like this creeped out feeling, like this whole thing has been going on underneath me and I didn't know anything about it. And I guess it wasn't surprising to me that this was something that the Pentagon might study. It seems like the kind of thing they should be concerned about, like looking for unidentified things in the sky, no matter what they are. It's cool with me if they're checking them out. Like, I think that's a good thing for them to do. And then, you know, I'm a journalist, so I'm interested in how other journalists put their stories together. So after I read it, just as a reader, I kind of went through it as a journalist to try to see, you know, what evidence had they provided for what they had said, what could be proven from what I could see in this article about what the DoD knew about UFOs or didn't, what these videos showed about UFOs or didn't. And at the time I was writing stories once a week for Wired magazine, and they said, well, why don't you go through that article and try to prove or disprove everything in it, and we can write our own follow-up. And yeah, 5 years later, I guess, here we are. So I guess I started, what really got me interested in it was I started talking to historians of UFOs and people like Jack. I can't remember if Jack and I talked right away or if it was, I think it was a little bit later, of just realizing that there was this community of people who were interested in UFOs and studied them really rigorously. And that there was this whole underworld of UFOs that I hadn't known anything about because it was outside of my sphere. And so then I jumped into the rabbit hole.
And how was that for you?
Awesome and frustrating. I didn't. People often ask me, because I mostly have written about things closer to the Perseverance rover than UFOs. If it was professionally scary to go say I was writing a book about UFOs, but I actually didn't experience any resistance from people in the science journalism or science community. Like, I think a lot more people are interested in it than we think, and lots of different people. In fact, I think most people are interested in it. And so, then I just started to try to think about them in terms of, I guess, something Jack mentioned earlier, I think in the intro of the show, like, what do these UFOs have to do with politics? What do they have to do with money? What do they have to do with these figures at the top of the hierarchy? What do they have to do with secret military projects? And just kind of trying to take it all apart. And it was, it was definitely have laptop will travel. Just trying to meet as many people as I could, and to be honest with them about where I was coming from. Like, hey, I'm kind of a skeptic. This really isn't my area, but I promise to listen to you honestly and portray your story correctly, because I also don't have all the answers. And so it was great.
When it is, I mean, I've met amazing people, and I've met people that I wouldn't want to, really should go back into the rocks that they came out from. And, it's so interesting. And I think that most of us who get involved in this because we've either had something unexplainable or we're just curious, we go down this rabbit hole and we go to UFO conferences, or we go online to a certain Facebook group or social media site. And, unfortunately, because there are not a lot of ethical boundaries in the UFO world, it's like you can be exposed to things that are very detrimental to you mentally. And to your life, to your, family. You see things like QAnon and the conspiracy theory, kind of that cult where it's like you're believing one thing, you're mistrusting the government here, which when we've talked about maybe questioning the government about specific things, but, it leads you down a dangerous path if you don't have people that are leading the way, that are giving factual information out and talking about the fact that you go to some of these conferences and there's it's like a religious, like a revival kind of a thing. And that can be like I said, that's dangerous. And so what were your thoughts when you went to different conferences?
Yeah, I think revival is actually the word that came to mind, but kind of an interesting revival where there's a lot of very, very hardcore belief, but like a lot of different beliefs. I think in my head, at least I called it like a big tent revival, like lots of different belief systems, equally fervent, and a lot of people just, you know, interested in and also trying to find answers, which I think is why things like the seedy underbelly and grifters and people taking advantage of other people is upsetting, because a lot of people do come to this area because they have had a personal and meaningful experience, or they're just, you know, trying to understand something they don't understand, and that they're highly emotionally invested, and it's not very nice to take advantage of that for other people. And so yeah, I think at most of the UFO events I attended, I would say that there was a group of people who were there because they thought it was fun. Like, this is a fun topic. I happened upon this. I'm just kind of casually interested. And then there were some people who would just believe everything that was said, which was kind of disturbing to me. Just, you know, would listen to a story and believe all of it and not check any of it out because it did fit with their belief system. And I think for me, particularly with UFOs, the reason it's important to not just do that, to not just accept things, is not, you know, because I hate UFOs or I hate wonder or something like that, but just because, like, I actually do think it's an important thing to get to the bottom of. And you can't get to the bottom of it if you're not, like, separating, what is it they say, the wheat from the chaff. You have to figure out that. So it's my long-winded answer to that question.
No, I like that. That's good. I mean, and how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Because I see very few. I mean, I hate to say this, but there are very few people in the UFO culture who are on the speaking circuit that I find even reputable now. I mean, it's like I once, you know, when I was first doing this, when I was state director for MUFON and I'm going to these different conferences, it's like I've had so much more respect for people. And I get it, because we all go through a learning process, or some of us do when we get thrown into the subject. But if you don't learn and start to observe some of the things that are going on around you, and some of the people that are throwing in religion or throwing in politics, you know, it's a dangerous slope there. And I also, and I've spoken a lot about this, but going to conferences and having like the early morning meetings of abductees, where people that are not trained in anything, that are completely delusional, are leading a group of people who've allegedly had experiences, and saying, yes, you are getting messages from the benevolent space brothers. Mind you, they're blonde-haired and blue-eyed, but, you know, we're never not, I mean, that's in and of itself a different thing. But, you know, it's like, at what point in time do people, to make that field better, you know, shine a spotlight on that? Or at what point in time do you just say, this is what it is, and it's not something I want to be involved with?
Yeah, that is a hard question. And I mean, maybe it's like private human spaceflight, where something has to go horribly and very publicly wrong for some kind of, you know, rules to be in place. But I don't know. I mean, speaking for myself, like I had planned to include experiencers and abductees in my book, and the more reading that I did, I think including of Jack's work on some of that, the more I thought, like, I am actually not equipped for this, and I don't want to be exploitative, and I don't want to, like, hurt someone more, and so I'm not going to do that. And so that was the line that I drew. And so, yeah, but I think, I mean, speaking to what you said about, you know, going from maybe admiring the keynote speakers at the conferences to, like, having some doubts about them, I feel a little bit about it like maybe the progression everybody has to go through with their parents, maybe, of just being like, Daddy is a hero, and then growing up and be like, actually, Daddy has a few problems, and just kind of starting to see the cracks in things as you learn more and more. But I do think it requires learning more and more, and that requires actually investigating.
That would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen you participate on panels where, Sarah, where you discuss the roles the media has played in this, and the UFO narrative, and how I'm going to ask you, please, in a second, how some places you think it may have gone wrong, and or how it could be more helpful in that way. So if you'll think about that's where I'm going to circle back to as I say, as we speak, media outlets are posting that defense officials called reporters and gave them information about this forthcoming UAP report that they've been anticipating. I have read a few different websites take on these reports, and I've looked at a few people's takes on Twitter. And of course, this whole UAP report grew out of the December 2017 story and the chain of events that were promoted by To the Stars Academy and Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo, and they got congressional interest in it, and now we find ourselves with people arguing, debating on how significant it is, what they're finding, what they're not finding. Just this week, I received yet another FOIA non-response from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It's about a year and a half old, the request, where I sought information on the members of the UAP task force and any documents pertaining to that. And what has become a rather common theme is the ODNI did not want any responsibility for this. They tell me no responsive records, check with the DOD. And I think many of us have found that email chains are not to be had, communications, memos from agencies that are named in documents that have been released, from agencies that are named in stories by reporters that supposedly had access to spokespeople and things like that. And so today, the actual statements I read from such representatives as from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, my takeaway is that they told reporters essentially another report's coming. We see no evidence of aliens. We see no evidence of alien presence or crashes. And we're trying to do this objectively, and we'll let you know as things develop. Depending on which media site I go to, which reporter, which person on Twitter, those statements are interpreted the gamut from one extreme to the other. So you are in that community, science journalism. What are your insights on how that story was handled? Coulda, woulda, shoulda, and what can be done to improve these echo chambers among reporters even?
Can I ask first before I answer what you saw as the two extremes of response?
That this one response, one school of thought is this whole To the Stars thing was much ado about nothing. Here comes the Secretary of Defense's office telling you we got nothing. And you people have been saying there's crashed UFOs. We've got academics that are respected. Dr. Gary Nolan saying People tell him this, that, and the other about crashed UFOs. So one extreme is there's nothing here, and the Secretary of Defense is telling you this. And the other extreme is professional journalists on Twitter saying, this is very interesting, there's more to come.
Yeah,
and reading as much as they can between the lines of these statements.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, the biggest problem I see with that side of things, and I think journalist UFO coverage in general, is that even if they're interested in it and interested in reading between the lines, they don't take it as seriously as they take other topics. And so they're willing to go with less evidence before they make inferences. Like, you wouldn't have a story that said, like, I don't know, country X didn't invade country Y. There's no evidence of a missile of country Z and country A. And then have like someone from, I don't know, I won't name an outlet, but someone say, there seems to be more here. Like, that's unprofessional, and you wouldn't do it. And I think because it doesn't, to them, have the same stakes as something political or something like that, they don't use the same standards of evidence that they would with another topic. And I think another thing probably is that most of them, aside from the ones who have followed the whole saga, probably don't have the background in the topic to understand things like where To the Stars started, how this whole progression has gone, who has been influencing who, and to have that context going into it. Like, I'm sure there's some people reporting on it who their editor's like, hey, I saw the Pentagon said something about UFOs, write it up, you have an hour. And that's a problem with the state of journalism, is that there's usually not enough time. There's not always enough time to do deep research, and often getting a sensational story out there is valued more than getting the real and true story, especially if it's like what they see as a frivolous topic. And then I think for the other side of the spectrum, I think, I don't know if I know what I think about the other side of the spectrum. What do you think about that other side of the spectrum, Jack?
Well, kind of circling back to the Downwinders and things like that. While we were considering that, I was thinking about that. I believe it was the Clinton administration that launched congressional hearings on radiation testing, covert radiation testing. And it wasn't just the atomic weapons. It was gruesome research and development that decisions were made about terminally ill people in hospitals and things like that. And I've read these records over the years, and like other congressional hearings I've read, your point is really valid about how much background do people have, because as you said, and you and Erica were observing about Downwinders, there's people that don't even have cursory knowledge of the story. There's people that don't know about the congressional hearings in the 1990s. And then there's people that read these hearings and would go, oh boy, y'all are just scratching the surface here. You really need to go deeper into this and this and this. Like reading the MK Ultra hearings, you'll like find something that you go, wow, y'all should have really drilled down through this foundation over here and things like that. And so that's a really valid point about how much background and context do people have in the first place. And yeah, I'm sure Erica gets this a lot too, that I'll have acquaintances, friends around that know I have some some adjacency to UFOs or something that will just say, yeah, I saw on CNN that they've like acknowledged they're real, man. And I don't even know where to go. But yeah, they sure did, like,
Yeah.
what else?
Yeah, I feel like I still see people tweeting like, can you believe the Pentagon acknowledged aliens are on its front lawn and no one did anything? I'm like, that's not what they said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really complex. There's a lot of moving parts to how we got from the New York Times printing that there are debris in a storage facility to 5 years later, the Secretary of Defense's office saying, no, there's not. There's not. And the Times never retracting it either.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's another problem with media coverage of things that I think is important, is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of accountability for the past. Like the New I will call out the New York Times has published directly contradictory articles about all of this. A month or so ago, they published an article saying that explaining what was shown in some of their original videos from their 2017 story as not UFOs, and other things that basically just directly contradicted what was in there. And they did not acknowledge anywhere in that new story that meant that the old story was misleading or like put a note in the old story.
That's correct.
Yes. Yeah, wrong is a stronger word than misleading. It is correct. And it's just like you just go on about your life, and then many fewer people always read that was Julian Barnes, the national security reporter, in answer to the question, which I think is also an important point. Like having people cover this story who come from different backgrounds and maybe even having them collaborate is good. Like putting national security reporters who understand the way that the military deals with technology and deals with reporters and understands their language, I think is important. And then also having people coming from a science background or things like that. Like it is a complicated topic. It's not just UFOs. It's complicated. And I think places don't fully acknowledge that.
And so what do you make of Elizondo and Avi Loeb and some of the people, that we've seen since that article, broke, and people that are trying to, in my opinion, manipulate things for their own personal gain? I still can't figure out Elizondo. I mean, obviously his credentials can't seriously be verified, but what are your thoughts, concerns about that, since you have done such, in-depth research about that over the years?
I am concerned that his credentials cannot be verified, and that nevertheless he is still presented as a credible source, as a person who was in this position. And we don't know that. And if we do know that, we don't know what the position was or what his role was exactly. And I think, a lot of many of my thoughts about Elizondo will probably stay in my head, but I will tell an anecdote about when I was writing my first article and, legitimately trying to confirm or disconfirm what was in the original New York Times story. And at first, To the Stars and Elizondo were both talking to me. And then I talked to them, and I went to talk to other people who pointed out various holes in the story. And then I went back to Elizondo and To the Stars, which is what you're supposed to do, and say, people have pointed out this. What do you have to say about this criticism? And when I brought them criticism and questions, they were like, what are you doing? And then stopped talking to me. So I think if you can't stand up to scrutiny when you're making what are pretty wondrous claims, that's not a good thing. People should be able to field inquiries and handle criticism if they're in positions of authority, I think. And Avi Loeb, don't know what's up with that guy. I'm glad that scientists are interested in investigating this topic, and particularly ones with resources, but I don't know how much background Avi has in the UFO topic too. And yeah, I haven't seen a lot come out of the research project. I don't know that I'm up on the latest. I don't think it's a bad thing to have systematic scientific research going on, but I guess I will say that the proof is in the pudding, and we'll see what they do.
And it is interesting to me. And again, I mentioned cryptocurrency at the beginning of the show, and it, you can see Avi Loeb and the people involved with Skinwalker Ranch and some other people in the UFO circle that are promoting cryptocurrency. And I've mentioned this a lot on my past shows, but I was at a conference up in Vernal near Skinwalker Ranch a few months back, and I was absolutely blown. I mean, I've been to conferences and been blown away. But you're here and you've got, Alan Hynek's son, and you've got all of these, military pilots and different things. And it's like a fraction of their talk is about something of substance. And the rest is about cryptocurrency and how you should be, Safe Moon, or you should be doing this and NFTs. And it was just like, what is going on? It was really disheartening and just I looked at all the people in the audience that were, some people are vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And again, they found a place where a group of con artists can kind of, come up around them and give them support and identify their vulnerabilities. And, here you are, you're an ex-military veteran, and, you've got the support system, and let's promote NFTs and cryptocurrency and all of these things. And it was just mind blowing to me. So for me, that was a concern to see Avi Loeb, as respected as he is, to kind of jump on that bandwagon as well with some of the other UFO grifters in the subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was just a downer. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No, I mean, I think it's especially bad because, I don't know, especially you mentioned MUFON earlier in your experience with MUFON, and I went to a number of MUFON meetings here in Colorado when I was working on my book. And, it's everything has its problems, but I think that the people who were there had really found their community and found a place where they could, they found their people and they felt safe. And I think maybe people in the audiences of things like crypto talks maybe feel the same thing, feel this kind of camaraderie. And I think it's particularly not nice to take advantage of that feeling to do something that harms people.
Absolutely. And I think, Jack and I both feel the same way in that regard. And I know that people that are in chat, which I really appreciate all of your support. I just want to say that, but we have the same questions, and I think these are important questions. And so with all of the information that you gathered when you were doing research into Elizondo and these things, I mean, is there anything that you wish that you would have put forward that you didn't, or is there a chance that you're going to be doing more on that topic later?
Yeah, I will definitely cover things as they emerge, kind of like I did for the Scientific American article about the NASA study. I feel like the problem with all of it is that there's so much news that's not really news that I end up not covering. It's a lot of the same, and I would prefer more progress. I think something that I would have asked more people in positions of power within the UFO community, people like Elizondo or Mellon or I don't know, anyone, is more about their motivations and personal experiences. And I don't have that information, but just to get at what is driving them for whatever it is that they're doing, and to try to understand that in the same way that I tried it for, I mean, I mostly talk to just people who research UFOs, not who are, leading organizations or things like that. But I think I would want to know the same thing about those people, and they probably wouldn't tell me. But I think that is kind of key for everyone anywhere, is what's driving you to do whatever you're doing, whether it's good or bad, what's at your core. So.
I think that's important. And that's the great thing I love about partnering with Jack, is that those are the types of things that we're looking into. What is driving a person, and who, who are they associating with? What business motivations do they have? What political motivations do they have? There's always something that is underlying all of this. And I think those are important topics to research diligently and then expose for the greater good of the topic, for the greater good of everybody on the planet. It's fascinating. And so I want to just give my thanks to you. I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and there's so many things to talk about with discrimination that I want to have you on a different show and talk a little bit more about that and discrimination and some of the issues that all of us you and I have dealt with. And so people can find you at your website, sarahscoles.com, and then also your books are available on Amazon.
They should be.
Well, that's good. That is good. So, I mean, and your articles, you've got on your website, you've got a whole list of all of your articles. And so it's just a great resource. I like your website a lot. And so if if people out there want to making contact Jill Tartar in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, they're already here, UFO culture and why we see saucers, and then the forthcoming mass defect life in the nuclear age. That'll be exciting. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Any fun holiday plans? Are you doing anything cool? Are you going to go snowshoeing?
I am going to see my grandma for Christmas, and then coming back to Colorado for New Year's. So I don't know what exactly we'll be doing, but she likes to watch Law and Order and drink rosé, and so I'll probably be doing a little bit of that. So
I've heard a lot worse ideas.
Yeah.
I like that. Jack, what are you doing for the holidays?
Eating, watching football, watching basketball. I'd like to comment briefly on you saying, motives and things about people. What you'll just comment into again and again as I worked on these stories over the years is someone that's perceived in the UFO community as being a big UFO person. It's often a very small part of their professional life as a military officer, as a scientist in other capacities. But if you have those blinders that you come at it from UFOs, you miss a whole lot about what some of these people have been doing in their careers. And history, even the mid-20th century people, even paints them differently as you come at it through ufology than if you took a historian's view of what some of these NICAP board members did. And, like we talk about CIA directors in the context of their UFO interests is just kind of silly. As compared to the other aspects of their careers, which should give us a lot more insight as to what the UFO topic may have represented to them. But thank you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for having me. Thanks to both of you. I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you. And back at you. And thank you, Sarah, and have a happy holiday. And Jack, I'm sure we'll be talking probably later tonight. I don't know, but I just want to thank all of you again for supporting me on my journey. And I think, and I'll just say goodbye to you guys and then do my little spiel, but you know that this has been just a fantastic journey. It's been exciting. I'm so looking forward to 2023 because Expanding Frontiers Research has an incredible agenda. We're going to do powerful things. You can go to expandingresearchfrontiers.org, subscribe to the email list. You can support the organization by your tax-deductible donations. I want to just take a moment to thank the people tonight in chat who donated super stickers, and also the people who've been supporting my show behind the scenes, my Patreons. I want to thank Mark, Thomas Boyle, Jay, Deb, Bob McGuire, Dave Beatty, Ho Scott, Ed Powers, Andrew Krause, and Mario, who is always here with me and is here tonight, which is so cool for the new show. So thank you very much for helping keep me on the air over the years. I look forward to a wonderful new chapter. I hope you have a happy holiday. And I'm debating on whether, and I'm going to put the feelers out, whether I'm going to do a New Year's Eve show. I don't know. Could I have a hot date? Maybe I'll have a UFO. I'm Expanding Frontiers show. I said UFO. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I will put that out there. It will be available for you on the schedule. If not, then the next show, the second installment for Expanding Frontiers, will be Friday, January 6th. The same. I've got a fun new lineup, including Robert Guffey, who has been on my show before. He wrote Camelio, but he's got a new book out that I'm excited to talk about. He's a great, great fellow. And I look forward to having him on the show. You guys take care, be safe, and thanks for joining me. And also, I want to mention Peter with Shadowy Spectrums. Peter has been doing some wonderful work. Go to Shadowy Spectrums, listen to his interviews, and support his show. Subscribe, and make sure you subscribe, like, and share information about this show, because I need everything, all the help that I can get to do that. It's a group effort. I also want to thank Leah Prime for being here, and all of you wonderful people. Thank you very much. Have a nice holiday, and I will catch you on the next show.